Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is Constant Reader Scott Daly, and this is my co-host who banged the shit out of an evil demon in order to keep me safe. It's Matt Freeman.
It's one of the hazards of podcasting. It's not the first time, is it?
It's not the first time, and it will not be the last. This week on the show, we are continuing our journey through The Wastelands, Book 3 of The Dark Tower. This week, we're on Chapter 3, Door and Demon. The first half of The Wastelands culminates in a two-part quest to draw the boy Jake into Roland's world. We meet a young Eddie and Henry, fight a monster and a demon, and admire Eddie's drawing skills as Jake finally joins the Ka-tet. Matt, what'd you think about this week's reading?
I mean, it was great. It was very action-packed, right? Like most of this book has, we started out with the bear, which was awesome, but it was actually fairly brief. It was over pretty quickly. This is just a great long build-up where you sort of know there's an action scene coming, just based on how the story is rearranging around this impending moment, and then it delivers on it really amazingly well.
One of the things that occurred to me this read-through was that this could be the conclusion of a full novel at the end of this part, and I wouldn't feel like I was robbed of a complete story. These three chapters kind of culminate in this climax that ends in part 1 of 2 of this book, and it's about 300 pages in, so it's about the length that the Gunslinger was. And if the book just ended here, I mean, maybe I'd be like, oh, shucks, I got to wait another 5 years if I was reading this as they were coming out. But narratively, I think this is a very satisfying conclusion to a segment of a story. I
really agree. I mean, we'll talk about it when we get there, I suppose. But the way Roland, reacts to finally getting Jake and then he has the doubt in his heart, that felt like it reminded me very much of the end of The Drawing of the Three, tonally.
Yeah.
I think, maybe possibly he even thought that this might be the end of a book, and then he felt like it was too short, or who knows. Yeah. I mean, who knows why Stephen King does things?
Yeah. No, literally nobody knows. All right, let's just get right into it and talk about Chapter 3, Door and Demon, of which there are both of those. I think the chapter titles in this book in particular are just very basic. There's not a lot of analysis and understanding to be gained from the chapter titles. It's very direct. First one is Bear and Bone, Key and Rose, Door and Demon. Got it. Yep. Easy.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So we begin the chapter by cutting back to Eddie dreaming in Roland's world. As you predicted, Matt, the lines spoken at the end of Jake's chapter were indeed meant for Eddie, and we see here that Eddie hears them and reacts to them.
Yeah, that was gratifying to see, and we're going to continue to see throughout this bit that it does seem like my intuition from last time that it's really Eddie who has this connection that's sort of pulling Jake is what was a correct intuition somewhat. I think so. Anyway. Yeah,
for sure. And I think we'll see throughout this chapter the link that was so tenuously between them in the last chapter, in which they were both kind of sharing the same dream, or at least it was a dream to Eddie and reality to Jake. They continue to bond closer and closer till they're standing next to each other. At least a younger version of Eddie is standing next to him.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So we see it's been 8 days since we last left the Ka-tet, which is, I think, a hint that time works differently in this world, which is something that will be defined rather specifically later. But 8 days have gone by in what we understand is like a day in Jake's world.
Yeah, that's interesting because maybe embarrassing to admit, but I didn't really notice that so much time was passing in Roland's world. I that's just not the kind of detail that I tend to notice. And also, I mean, yeah, it's weird because Roland's world and the real world, or whatever, New York, seem very, very decoupled, because obviously Roland's doors opened onto 3 different time periods that were basically out of order. Eddie's time is the latest of the 3 times that he goes to. Mm-hmm. And so clearly there's just something. I don't know what to make of it exactly. I do think it's interesting that you pointed out that it just seems like, at least in this particular scene, or this particular chapter, that time in Roland's world is just passing faster than time in New York.
Yeah, I think we see that it's been 2 months total since the end of drawing of the three by the time we get to the end of this chapter, which seems crazy, but that's how much time has passed. It's nuts.
Yeah.
But the point is, in this time, Roland has gone from bad to worse, and that Eddie wakes up after hearing the words in his dream, goes to talk over to Roland. Listen, this is what Roland says here, Matt. "I think I'm getting ready to die." Roland looked at Eddie. The bright shine left his eyes, and now looking into them was staring into a pair of deep, dark wells that seemed to have no bottom. Eddie shuddered, more because of that empty stare than because of what Roland had said. "And do you know what I hope lies in the clearing where the path ends, Eddie?" "Roland." "Silence," Roland said. He exhaled a dusty sigh. "Just silence. That will be enough. An end to this." It's so, I think it's so powerful to see how bad Roland is that he's just like resigned himself to death.
Yeah, it's really something, because we have this sense that this guy has been soldiering on through endless hardships well before the book even started, well before the Gunslinger even started. And we've seen him suffer through all these ordeals and the lobstrosity bite where like his body is trying to die, but he still has this strength in him. But here he's almost completely succumbed to the torment of this mental phenomenon, whatever this is. And it, Eddie more or less points this out for us, how interesting it is that he's almost laid low by this purely mental phenomenon. And it's interesting because like on the one hand, it shows how horrible this must really be. And on the other hand, it makes me wonder if maybe Roland isn't relatively weak against mental sorts of attack.
Interesting. Yeah.
Relative to physical, because he's just so indomitable physically, but this is, he's just like ready to give up after this.
Yeah. I kind of want to compare how he's doing to how Jake's doing. And I know that's not fair because King has just established that time is not working the same, but Jake, while losing his shit as well, seems to be just generally better off. Jake is not at the point Roland's at yet. And that literally just could be a time difference, timey-wimey nonsense. But it could also show Jake's strength lies in a different place than Roland's does.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I guess we'll pay attention as we go because, okay, so by the end of all this, Jake is going to be drawn. And so far it's been fairly clear that each of the people who are drawn, there is some greater purpose, that there's, or even many small and large purposes for why they were drawn. And I'm not really sure what Jake's purpose will be because like he's a boy, he's a little boy. He's what possible use could he have? That's the thought that you have. And of course, I'm sure it's going to make a lot of sense in retrospect, but right now I don't know.
Sure.
I also wanted to note that, the great writing of he exhaled a dusty sigh, which is great. It's evocative. It gives you this feeling. But also the word dust is used many times in this chapter. I'm not sure if this is probably the first time, but it's really kind of a refrain. I think it may be sort of subliminally priming you for, I'll show you fear in a handful of dust later on. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that line in The Wastelands, the T.S. Eliot poet, is a refrain throughout this book. It's used again and again and again. So I think you're right that he seems to be using dust in a specific kind of way here. That's a good pull. I didn't notice that. That's great. Mm. So Eddie finally reveals what he's been working on all this time, the key. And he's made really good progress on it, Matt, but it's not quite done yet. But it's close, and Eddie is already calling it the finest work he's ever done, which is wonderful.
Yeah. I'm sort of glad that the reveal of the key wasn't saved for some overly dramatic moment because, that would have, I think that might have been a bit much. Like it's time to reveal the key. So he gives Roland the key and it helps him and it's great.
Yeah, but I think, when we talked about back in chapter 1, when we talked about Eddie's decision to keep this a secret, I think general narrative convention says, okay, he's keeping this a secret. That will be a decision that has consequences. And we started kind of speculating on what those consequences would be. But it didn't really, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just like I think it's part of Eddie's general lack of self-confidence that makes it so he wants to hide this. He doesn't want people knowing that he's working on this. He's very insecure about it. And the insecurity kind of leads to the fumble he has with the key, which fortunately he recovers from at the last minute. But it didn't pay off, I think, like kind of we discussed it maybe doing. I think I posed the question to you at the time, like, does this make you worried? Does this scare you that he's choosing to hide this? And it didn't pay off in that way.
Yeah, I said it did worry me, and it hasn't. It didn't have the type of consequences I expected. I think the only consequences it really had is that Roland perhaps unnecessarily suffered longer than he needed to. And even that is a bit tenuous, because even if Eddie had been like, yeah, it's a key, I'm working on a key, that they wouldn't have necessarily realized that Roland should hold the key.
Yeah. It's only through the intervention of Jake that we learn that. But yeah. I mean, it is an interesting choice. I think whenever a character chooses to keep something secret from another character, it is always something that your eye is drawn to. And we did not see it resolved in the typical way you would in storytelling. But I was happy with it. I think it does do well to reflect Eddie's personality and how much his past is still kind of reigning over him, which becomes very explicit in this chapter, right?
Exactly, because King is definitely doing something with the choice to have Eddie hide the key for a while. It's just not what we assumed. We assumed it was going to be some kind of plotty, he's gonna hide it, and then somebody's not gonna know that he has it, and it's gonna be dramatic. And it's like, no, it's just showing that he has this lack of confidence, which comes into play really in the foreground here.
Yeah.
I wanted to draw out this particular exchange where Eddie basically talks to himself out loud. He tells the voice of Henry in his mind to shut up, and Roland notices this and says, "Your brother comes to you often, doesn't he, Eddie?" For a moment, Eddie only stared at him, his carving still hidden in his hide square. Then he smiled. It was not a very pleasant smile. "Not as often as he used to, Roland. Thank Christ for small favors." "Yes," Roland said. "Too many voices weigh heavy on a man's heart." So I just want to pull that out because it's kind of the first textual acknowledgement from Roland that Roland recognizes that he's got all these different voices in his head: Court, Stephen, Martin, and maybe that's going to be foregrounded more rather than just being like this thing that we mention occasionally. Oh, Roland has the voices of all of his old mentors in his head.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny because I think it's doing two things. I think one thing, Roland probably is hearing the same kind of the two men arguing in the room like Jake is hearing right now. So it's playing off of that. But I do absolutely agree. We're meant to think about the moments back in Drawing of the Three where Roland was kind of beset by voices from his past trying to either help him or hurt him in different ways.
Cool. Yep.
Yeah. I really do love the moment. We have this moment and it's because Henry's talking to Eddie again and plaguing him with doubt here in this moment as he's about to show off the key. And this is perfect because King is setting up that Henry Dean is about to enter the story once again. Not in the way I think either of us, certainly not the first time I read this, thought about, and I don't think you did either, that this idea that Henry is going to come into the story again and it's going to matter, and he's spending time here to remind you about Henry so we can play off of this later as we see him, because we're going to see Henry as a child with Eddie in these chapters.
Yeah, no, I did not anticipate this at all, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it's great. I can't wait. I can't wait to talk more about Henry.
Yeah, me too. Basically, we're going to be all aboard the Henry Dean Sucks Express this week.
Oh yeah. And we just have so many less excuses for him that we have in the past in these chapters.
Definitely, because previously the book has kept us ambivalent between, Henry is awful versus, Henry he's had a hard life. He had to go to Vietnam, but this chapter just dashes that to smithereens because Henry just does not come off well. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, so Roland takes hold of the partly finished key, and I love his reaction here, Matt. I still love it. He screams, "Gone! The voices are gone!" He looked back at them, and Eddie saw something he had never expected to see in his life, not even if that life stretched over 1,000 years. Roland of Gilead was weeping.
Yeah, it's really moving. It really affected me. It shows you how Eddie thinks about Roland, which is interesting because we know that Roland can be a pretty emotional person. Although I guess if you'd asked me, I wouldn't have expected him to be weeping either. But
Yeah, he's emotional, definitely. I just don't think he's like loud spoken very often. Like I always imagine him as like, even when he's yelling at you, quote unquote yelling, it's more just like stern tone based yelling and not so much volume based yelling.
Yeah.
And so like just to hear him just scream out in just this unbridled joy, I think is just really, really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the audiobook read on that moment was great, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So then after this moment, we cut back to Jake's world. So we had our first chapter that was entirely in Midworld. Our second chapter was entirely in New York City. And now this chapter is going to jump back and forth, Matt, which I think is a really cool element because we kind of get to see how these two stories are converging here in the third chapter.
Yeah. I like that too. I like all this stuff as, we begin to see the alignment of things.
Yeah, yeah. So back in Jake's world, the boy is having a dream. And first, he in his dream, he sees a sign that says, "Traveler, beyond lies Midworld." And that means nothing to us at this point, except that the Midworld Express was the name of the company in Charlie and the Choo Choo. That's all we know. But then he's walking around and he's suddenly on an old basketball court that's strewn with the robots that we saw in Shardek's lair. And the boy, there's a boy sitting there, and the boy says, "This is the portal of the bear, but it's also Brooklyn," which is like, what? Which is just fun. I think we're showing how like the ways in which the two worlds are coming together, how it can be both these things at the same time. But the boy is there. He's 13. He has hazel eyes and is shooting baskets. We see very quickly that this is a 13-year-old Eddie Dean. And Matt, this is one of those moments where I was kind of like trying to push you to remember something last week, but I didn't want to do it too overtly. And I think not to toot my own horn, but I think I threaded the needle perfectly there, where like maybe it would have made you realize it, but I'm okay with it just going right by you and you getting to realize it now. We were talking last week about how there's this connection between Eddie and Jake, but with the timey-wiminess, Eddie exists in Jake's time, and they'd be very close to the same age. I think Eddie is 13 in Jake's time, and he's 11 or 12. So, so that's a fun thing that I wanted you to discover on your own, but I wanted to kind of help point you toward a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely right there to be noticed, but I didn't get it at all. I think I'm just not used to all the looseness with time.
Sure.
I'm also just not very good at remembering numbers. So, like, if you ask me right now what year was Eddie drawn from, I'd just be like, I don't know. I'm sorry.
The only reason I know this is because I've read this book like 4 times, and I spend way too much time reading and rereading it before each week's episode. It was 1987 is when Eddie was drawn.
Sure. Well, some people just remember numbers, and I'm not one of them.
That's not really me either.
Yeah. But I mean, I did, like, as soon as this dream was happening, I did get that the other kid was Eddie, like, instantly. So so it didn't take me long to pick up on it once it started to become relevant, at least. Yeah.
It's really cool. I like this idea so much. And I like how it gets more and more complicated as we go through the chapter too. There's so much like weird time stuff going on here.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a bit. First, Teen Eddie tells Jake that he needs to follow him and says, "I'll take you to where you need to go. He just needs to head to Co-op City, and then he'll find Eddie, and that's easy." And I really love this moment where it says, "Wait," Jake yelled and ran across the basketball court towards the disappearing boy. One of his feet struck a shattered robot that looked like a child's toy tractor. He stumbled and fell to his knees, shredding his pants. He ignored the thin burn of pain. "Wait, you have to tell me what all this is about. You have to tell me why these things are happening to me." "Because of the beam," the boy, who was now only a pair of floating eyes, replied, "and because of the tower. In the end, all things serve, even the beams serve the tower. Did you think you would be any different?" I just think this is wonderful and kind of ominous and like crazy at the same time. I don't know. I really liked it.
Yeah. Well, it's cool because even if you realize this is Eddie, you know that Eddie probably wouldn't say that and definitely not say it that way. So it's just kind of a creepy dream thing. I mean, this is also one of the few times where the spirit of whatever is going on, Ka or the White or both or whatever, basically is speaking to Jake.
Yeah.
Through Eddie, sort of, but yeah.
Yeah, that is the interesting part. Like, this is not Eddie Dean.
Right.
our Eddie Dean that is talking right now. This is a vision of Eddie Dean as he'll look at 13, speaking from the tower or whatever, which is a very interesting, like, because I think I instinctively want to go, it's like, oh, this is like they're communicating through dreams together, but that's not really what's happening. It's something is communicating to both of them through both of their dreams. Right,
because they are sort of sharing these dreams, but again, this is not what Eddie would say in this situation. So
right, exactly. Yeah. And of course, I also wanted to bring this up because he trips and falls and scratches his knee and shreds his pants here. And when he does wake up in the morning, he sees that his knee's all scraped up.
Yep.
And I don't even know like how to process that other than these aren't just dreams, right? This is something beyond that.
It's magic. It's the beam. Yeah.
It's the beam. Yeah. All things serve it, Matt. All of them. So the other thing that happens when Jake wakes up is he has solved the riddle. Aaron Deepnow's riddle from last week, which you correctly got right. It's a river. And that's great because we don't know what that means yet.
Yeah.
We learn nothing more except that Jake now knows the answer. But we also get this really cryptic hint here that, like Samson's riddle, this one has it has two answers. And we don't know what that means. And I sat here for way too long trying to come up with a way of speculating what this means without just spoiling the future of the book, but I couldn't. So if you have any guesses about what the second meaning of this riddle would be, go for it.
I forgot to set aside. I didn't pause and think about it at the time, and then I just kind of forgot about it.
You forgot to set aside the time. I think that's okay, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like I should have, honestly, but no, I didn't. I mean, the only river reference we get is eventually they come across a river,
right,
in Roland's world. So
yeah, and part of me, I don't know, and this is just like a general like inside baseball like conversation about how we want to do this project. Like, part of me doesn't want to make you guess at every single mystery, right? Because I think part of the fun of reading this series is discovering what the things mean as you go. So sometimes it's fun to say, what do you think this means, Matt? But sometimes it's just like, we don't need to spend time unlocking this riddle. Let the book do it for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the entertainment value of listening to someone read through a book is just hearing them just react. That's amazing. And then part of it is hearing them puzzle through things. Maybe doing it wrong. I mean,
sure,
that is legitimately fun to just be like, that's not right, but it's still fun to watch them struggle.
Sure,
but
sure.
Yeah, it's I think it's fine.
Sure. All right. So Jake, after waking up, decides that he's done with everything. He's not going back to school. He's not hanging out in this apartment anymore. He's done, and he goes to pack up right now. He packs up a big bag of clothes, adds both of the books he got from the Restaurant of the Mind, and also goes and gets his father's gun for good measure, and some really, really badass aviators.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
He leaves his parents a brief note, basically acknowledging, and the book textually says that he knows he'll be leaving them, quote unquote, for good, and then walks out the door. Not for a long time, not, forever, basically. He's acknowledging that he will never see his parents again.
Yeah, it's heavy. The scene of him sneaking out of the house is also really good, I think.
Sure.
It's yet another thing about King that I'm coming to really love, that he could have just skipped this, right? Like, we could have just skipped to Jake already being out on the street. Like, it could be hours later. Jake could just offhandedly mention, like, yep, he'd snuck out and he'd packed the gun and he'd packed the clothes. But King wants to show us this. He wants to give us this tense scene, even though nothing really comes of it.
Yeah.
It's just entertaining.
There's something important to the decision, not only the decision to run away from home, never to return, but also to carry through. Like, there's an emotional importance to not just making the choice, but to also follow through on the choice to the point where you're packing up your stuff one at a time. This is it. You're breaking into your father's study and like sneaking to get his gun, and they might be awake. Like, these are all moments, I think, where you're like, commitment could flounder a little bit and you change your mind and that kind of thing. So I think there are moments of tension to be mined from that activity, and King certainly does it.
Yeah, I guess just generally, if there's a scene where he could give us a riveting reading experience, a tense moment, he does. He never he never leaves you feeling like, oh, I would have liked to see that. He always shows you those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Because he loves to write all this stuff, and that's why his books are so dang thick.
Yep.
I just like, I don't have too much to say. I just love this quote so much. A stone seemed to roll off his heart as the latch snicked, and a strong sense of anticipation seized him. He didn't know what lay ahead, and he had reason to believe it would be dangerous. But he was 11 years old, too young to deny the exotic delight which suddenly filled him. There was a highway ahead, a hidden highway leading deep into some unknown land. There were secrets which might disclose themselves to him if he was clever, and he was lucky. He had left his home in the long light of dawn, and what lay ahead was some great adventure. If I stand, if I can be true, I'll see the rose, he thought as he pushed the button for the elevator. I know it. And I'll see him, too. This thought filled him with an eagerness so great it was almost ecstasy. I like this, like, one of the things about Eddie and Susannah was kind of this, like, slow rolling acceptance, almost a begrudging acceptance to this quest, this adventure. Like, I'm remembering back in Drawing of the Three when Roland said, like, you will see wonders, like he was selling up this big adventure, and Eddie was kind of just like, I don't give a shit about that. But like, it's almost as if he was speaking to Jake there, we see here in this moment, because that is the exact kind of speech that would have excited Jake to no end.
Yeah, I like that. Jake kind of has this purity where he's in it for the rose, right? He's in it for this thing that he thinks of as being beautiful and like perfect and needs to be protected. I also like how Jake's thoughts are often very kind of epic. Like, if I stand, if I can be true, these are just don't strike me as typical 11-year-old thoughts. But like, it kind of reminds me in a way of there are other worlds than these, because he just does tend to slip into this maybe it's a psychic thing, maybe it's a Ka thing, or maybe that's just who Jake is as a person. Like, he just thinks this way. He's just, he is unusually well read, so maybe he just thinks in high fantasy sometimes. But what
is it that his English teacher described him as? Omnivorous in his reading.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think you're right that, like, we in that moment in Go, There Are Other Worlds Than These, you immediately pointed out how odd sounding that is for an 11-year-old kid to be talking like that, and we speculated that was something speaking through him, and we do see a lot more of those here. And is it a combination of the two? Is it something speaking through him? Is it him itself? Like, this is just who he is? Is it a little bit of both?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So back in Roland's world, the Ka-tet stumbles upon the ruins of an old road, which makes their travel forward so much easier because they still have a wheelchair, Matt. It's not easy, and it's been difficult for them. So just having a flat surface that they could roll the wheelchair on makes their lives so much easier. And they celebrate by stopping for a bite to eat. And I want to pause here. This scene, like, isn't super important, but I think it's like one of those things, you were talking about with spending the time on Jake packing up and sneaking out of the house. This scene just sits with our characters for a little bit and just spends some time with them. And I think it's really important. We see here, food, Eddie cried. Bring it on. Chicken Florentine, Polynesian shrimp, veal lightly sauteed with mushrooms, and Susannah elbowed him. Quit it, white boy. I can't help if I've got a vivid imagination, Eddie said cheerily. Roland slipped his purse off his shoulder, hunkered down, and began to put together a small noon meal of dried meat wrapped in olive-colored leaves. Eddie and Susannah had discovered that these leaves tasted a little like spinach, only much stronger. Eddie wheeled Susannah over to him, and Roland handed her 3 of what Eddie called gunslinger burritos. She began to eat. I just love this scene, and it doesn't matter. It's literally just, hey, we haven't gotten to see these 3 just kind of chill with each other for a while.
Yeah, no, it's really important to have these kind of breaks where we just check in and kind of track the details of their relationships and their status, and remember that they're humans. They have meals. They sometimes they just have to sit around and eat. And I love the detail of the gunslinger burrito. It's like that's totally an Eddie thing, and it's just delightful. Reminds me a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about how there's no real conflict between the Ka-tet members. There are transient conflicts. There's butting of heads. There is there are moments of conflict, but there's no terrible secret simmering between them. There's no building resentment. It's just not that kind of story. And I'm kind of glad because it allows us to just be like, yeah, these guys, they're the Fellowship, they're friends. Mm-hmm. They're going to face all these challenges together. And maybe the story will change at some point and there will be conflict within, the Fellowship. But I'm just really enjoying this idea that like, these are the good guys. They work together. It's pleasant. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, like, I feel like it sometimes is probably hard to remember to write things like this into your stories because like it's so easy to just pass them by. Like in this, like the actual important element of this scene is Eddie like kind of facing the fact that he's super nervous about finishing the key and there's all that important stuff going on. But before we get into that, let's just take a breath with our characters. And like, I wonder if like sometimes it's just very easy to get like caught up in moving the plot forward where you just skip that stuff and just move on to the key meat of the scene. And King never does that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it is. It reminds me very much of another author we cover who writes web serials, and he wrote one web serial called Pact where, it was, I enjoyed it, but one of the pieces of criticism that you hear is that it's just too fast paced. It's just too breakneck. There's no breaks. Mm-hmm. And then he kind of reacted in his next story. And I would say his next stories by including a lot more of moments of just the characters touching base with each other and being human around each other, so that you kind of like them. It helps you like the characters before they just, it helps you like them if they're not just constantly struggling all the time. Yeah. You have to see them just kind of hang out at least a little bit.
Yeah. Having read one of those two books you're talking about, agree.
Yeah.
Anyway, we also learn that it's been 2 days since the night Eddie handed the key over to Roland. Another hint here that time works differently, Matt, because it was only like one night for Jake.
Yeah.
But Eddie has not worked on the key at all since. He's putting it off. And this is King here establishing one of the big central narrative conflicts of the chapter, maybe even the whole part. Will Eddie Dean have the confidence and ability to finish the key in time for it to do its intended purpose? This is the big question of this chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might even call this the main character conflict of this whole part of the book. Because, it is Eddie going to be able to defeat this voice of Henry that lives in his head? Both Jake's and Roland's lives depend on it. And it's really great storytelling because consider what it would be like if we didn't have this element of Henry's voice tearing him down all the time. Then it would just be a relatively inert question of like, will man carve thing? and then it's like, oh, he did. Good. Cool. Moving on. But the element of like the Henry's voice makes it personal, makes it human. It makes it about self-doubt and having negative voices in your past, and really makes it resonate in a way where it wouldn't if there wasn't this element here. So I really love it.
Yeah, and I think thinking about this half of the book as a whole, I think when King looked back at Drawing of the Three, one of the things that he was not satisfied with was how he set up this relationship between Eddie and Henry and then kind of just removed Eddie from it. And so he, in this sequel to that book, found a way to bring that relationship back to the forefront in a really interesting way. And I love it. I love it so much.
Absolutely.
I actually wanted to use this. I'm going off script here. Sorry, Matt. But I wanted to use this to talk to you about something that I noticed in this section that I really, really liked. And it has to do with this conflict of Eddie's. It's this idea that this is a book so largely ruled by the concept of Ka or fate or destiny or anything. And so many of our characters' actions, specifically in this chapter, are done because something external to them is telling them to do it. Like, why does Eddie carve the key? Because he saw it in a fire and felt like it was the right thing to do. Why does Jake go to Co-op City? Is because a voice told him to do it. Why does he act like throughout? And it's going to get even worse from here. It's going to get more prevalent from here. but the characters are like their actions are being dictated by this external force. But that never strips them from agency, because what I love, the line that King skirts here is he has the power of destiny influencing these people's path. But when it comes down to it, it is always their choices at the end of that path that decide what happens or not. Like Eddie is told to make the key. Eddie makes the key perfect because of his own ability to get over his own shit. Jake is told to go to the Dutch Hill house. Jake is able to survive the Dutch Hill house because of his own strength and his own ability. And I think that's really important, because I think like skirting this, when you have a story that's dealing so directly with destiny, being able to thread that needle in a way where the choices still matter, I think is really important. And I think King does such a great job of it in this chapter.
Yeah, they're shown the way, they're pointed the way. But the way is invariably hard and requires them to show their strength, or maybe to undergo some personal growth. And so it's not just, it's not just like, yeah, go that way. It's like, go through that thing that is the thing you're terribly afraid of specifically.
Right.
And so, it is really interesting that the universe seems to be sort of set up almost to challenge these people, and in doing so make them stronger. I don't know if that's because that's just how the story is written for entertainment value, or if that's because the universe is actually trying to sort of like sharpen these gunslingers into being tougher and stronger people.
Hey Matt, why not both?
Why not both? Indeed.
So here, Eddie also admits that he's having dreams he can't quite remember. Dreams of the house on Neibolt Street. Sorry, wrong book. The Dutch Hill house. He also admits that he remembers seeing someone hanging out, someone who he was supposed to pretend not to know. And this is Jake. And this is a really interesting decision, right? He's remembering seeing Jake. Kind of.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, you mean like in the dream you're supposed to pretend you don't know him, but in real life you didn't know him. So it's just funny.
It's funny little like manipulation of time. It's like, I think I'm supposed to pretend I didn't know this kid, but if we like deal with causality and like time travel, then Jake was always there, right?
Yeah,
right.
Well, that's it's interesting because it causes us to assume that Jake was always there, and Eddie is like from the like history or the world line or whatever where Jake didn't die, which is what Eddie has said this whole time. It's just so weird that the whole first book was on like a historical world line that didn't happen.
Yeah,
but it does seem like Jake was always there in Eddie's memories.
A bit later, the group comes upon the same sign that Jake saw in his dream, Matt. Traveler, beyond lies Midworld. And now I can finally stop saying Roland's World. And I can just say Midworld from now on. Hooray for me. I'm so glad. This is one of the things, and we've talked about these as we've come to them throughout the book, but this is one of those things that is very difficult for me to slip up and say wrong. And I have to check myself and make sure, but it's not Roland's World. It's Midworld. Hooray. Hooray.
What's funny is now I'm so used to calling it Roland's World that it might take me a bit of time to catch up.
Oh, no. We do learn a little bit about Midworld in this moment and why this is so significant, because Roland says here, it means that we're nearing the end of the first stage. Roland's face was solemn and thoughtful as he handed his knife back to Eddie. I think we'll keep to this old coach road now, or rather it will keep to us. It has taken up the path of the beam. The woods will end soon. I expect a great change. What is Midworld? Eddie asked. One of the large kingdoms which dominated the earth in the times before these. A kingdom of hope and knowledge and light. The sort of things we were trying to hold on to in my land before the darkness overtook us as well. Someday, if there's time, I'll tell you all of the old stories. The ones I know, at least. They form a large tapestry. One which is beautiful, but very sad. I really like this because we've entered this new, like, first of all, we're nearing the end of the first stage, right? So like they've moved into a new land of Midworld. And this is a place that used to be amazing, but we get hints that has all gone because it's beautiful, but very sad. Like the fall of Midworld happened just like the fall of Gilead happened, it seems.
Yeah, sounds like it. Just because it's my job to point these things out, Midworld obviously reminds me of Middle Earth. It's like very, very, very reminiscent of Middle Earth, which itself I think was like a riff on Midgard, the Norse word.
Right.
But yeah, that's cool. It leaves me unsure as to what the relationship is between Gilead and Midworld, because Midworld is described as a kingdom and Gilead was a kingdom. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how those two things relate, and I definitely want to learn more. And I suspect Roland will eventually tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing to me is that I think Roland makes it fairly clear here that he's never been to Midworld before. Like, he comes from a different place and he's never been here before. Because we see a little bit later when they see the city and he sees the river, he's like, I didn't think this existed. So Midworld to him is a place that only was in stories, just like the Guardians were something that was only in stories. And he's experiencing this for the first time, just like the rest of our characters.
True. Yeah, it's interesting how he knows these legends. Like, I don't know, it makes me curious, like, how old is Midworld, you know, the kingdom of Midworld, like when was this relevant? And I know that questions like that sort of cease to mean anything when he apparently spent 20 years traveling 100 miles or whatever it was. So whatever. One thing I wanted to note about this book is like, it seems like we're dipping into Roland's head less and less frequently. Obviously the gunslinger was almost entirely in his head. Sure. Drawing of the Three was probably mostly in his head, with jaunts into Eddie's and Odetta's, and now seems to be mostly in like Eddie's, actually. I would say. I don't know if I can substantiate that in terms of like word count, but it just feels like we've moved very much into Eddie's, and we occasionally dip into Roland's head to get at him, you know, his reaction to certain things. I just think that's interesting.
Yeah. And one of the things we did in the previous book as well was, like, normally a point of view shift would occur with like a section shift, where, like, you know, King has his chapters and then he has numbered sections within the chapters. And normally, like, if we were going to swap over to Eddie or to Roland, that would occur with one of those section breaks. And it doesn't really happen here. Like, the section breaks here mostly denote jumping back and forth between Midworld and Jake's world and Earth. We kind of just jump in and out of characters, like, it just mid chapter, mid section, it'll just jump to Roland's head briefly for a moment and then jump back to Eddie. So the point of view is much less rigid. But I totally agree with you. We're in Roland's head less. And I wonder if that's just for practical reasons, because we're really starting to delve into the mythology of the world a little bit more. And we kind of just, King wants to mask that from us. And so we're just dipping into the person with knowledge's head a little bit less. So we don't have to worry about dealing with, well, why isn't this character wondering about these kind of things type of thing. Yeah.
I think that makes a degree of sense, actually. That didn't occur to me. Well, but you did make me realize, like, the thing about Eddie is Eddie has always been our fish out of water audience insert character. Sure. And thus, when we're seeing new things, it sort of does make sense for us to just be seeing them from his perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Susannah as well, but I think Eddie's reaction to these things is much more broad and entertaining than Susannah's is. And so King tends to go to him more often.
Yeah, well, and Eddie is from the 80s, which is when the books were coming out.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So he's literally just like quote unquote contemporary.
Yeah, it is interesting how quickly we're going to leave that behind, though, right? Because Drawing of the Three came out in 1987. This book came out in 1991. So we're definitely leaving that behind as we go forward. I think the next book came out 5 years after that, and then another 5 years after that. So Eddie's going to be dated by the time we start moving on to the latter half of the series.
Yeah. It is funny how, as far as I'm concerned, the 80s were still about 20 years ago.
Oh, gosh, it was so long ago. I don't want to think about it.
Yeah, no, let's not.
All right. So Eddie does in this moment begin working on the key again, but he's having a really tough go of it, Matt. He just can't get back to like the pure, beautiful, like, love of creation that he had in the very beginning. And we see that in this moment, he craves some heroin for the first time in a while. Like, he genuinely craves some, and I think thinks having just a hit would like settle him enough to make this problem go away and fix him right up, you know?
Yeah, I love this moment. It's so real. This idea that Eddie's anxiousness, relating largely to the doubts that Henry has injected into his head, is pushing him to crave the drug that he's certainly no longer chemically dependent on. I think this is just pushing the button of the psychological dependence. This is something that he has a lot of anxiety about, and he's so worked up that he's like, oh, you know what? I just could really use some of that stuff that straightens me out. Yeah, it's because, I mean, that's my understanding of drug addiction is very often it has a tremendous psychological component of like there is a huge unaddressed suffering in this person's life that they're essentially medicating with. And here we're seeing the thing that Eddie feels a need to medicate for, basically.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and not to speculate too much on Stephen King's personal life, this book came out in 1991. King had just finally gotten clean. I think Needful Things, the book that's coming out 3 months after this, is the first book he wrote totally sober. So, we already talked about the act of creation in how he describes the act of carving wood and related that to the idea of creating art. And so you kind of think of where Stephen King's getting close to the ending of a book and he's dissatisfied with it, and he just you get this inspiration and you create the story, and then somewhere along the way the going gets a little tough and it's not easy to get to the next part anymore, and you're starting to doubt your ability to get to complete the story. And in that moment, wouldn't it be nice if I could just have a little drink? Yeah. And I can really see Stephen King suffering through something very similar to this. And I'm speculating here. We don't know for sure, but I do see King putting a lot of himself and his struggles with addictions in the Eddie character.
I think that is probably accurate, and it makes it hit even harder, actually. So yeah, I like it.
Love it. All right, back on Earth, back in Jake's world, the boy realizes he was a bit too hasty to run away from home, Matt. He left home 8 hours earlier because he was told by Dream Eddie that he needs to be in Co-op City at about 3 p.m. So he's got some time to kill. And there's this one part that I wanted to call your attention to, because he says he can't go to Brooklyn yet because a kid playing hooky would be noticed in the hinterlands. Which is a great way to refer to Brooklyn in one of the biggest cities in the world, the hinterlands. And it's another weird kind of Jakeism where he's not talking quite like a normal 11-year-old kid. It does also remind me very much of the Hyperborean wanderer that Cal Tower calls him last week's chapters.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, other than being a cool callback to that moment, it does make me wonder, are we going to be in the far north at some point? Is Jake going to be associated with some kind of icy landscape? Was that foreshadowing, I guess is what I'm saying. And
yeah, that's interesting.
We'll have to find out.
Did you know that hinterlands doesn't necessarily mean cold place? For whatever reason, I always just assumed, because it sounds so much like winter, but it's literally just uncharted area is what hinterlands mean. I didn't know that. I just always assumed cold. It just sounds like a cold word.
I think I always picture like a cold, uninviting forest, specifically.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay, cool.
But I mean, you can see that I definitely did that too, because Hyperborean, I went, oh, north, hinterlands. That's the cold part. Exactly. Those are two the same. But yeah, no, it doesn't actually mean that.
They're not. So probably not foreshadowing in that case. But
it might be. You don't know. Yeah. Maybe King thought the same thing we did.
It's possible.
So Jake wanders around the city, not sure what to do. He ends up at the Met, where he sneaks in with a group of school kids. And we see here that he's especially fond of paintings of the Old West and a steam locomotive. Matt, King is not being too subtle here, is he?
Nah, he's not. But I mean, for me, it all kind of amounts to this ambient sense that Jake is more psychic than the other characters that we have, because it seems like the universe is always showing him these kind of hints. The other two who were drawn, Roland had to jump directly into their brains and mess up their lives more or less manually before he could get their attention. But Jake is just being the universe just throwing all this stuff at him constantly. And I think it's fun. I just think it's fun.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because you're absolutely right that with Susannah and with Eddie, the drawing was done by Roland just walking into their heads and saying, "What's up? Let's go."
Yeah.
But with Jake, the story and the Ka force, whatever, is having to lead him. He has to do something as well. Like, this is not just people in Midworld need to draw Jake. He needs to do something as well, and that is distinctly different from those other two.
Right. It didn't just give Roland a door to step into Jake's head.
Right.
It very much is, maybe that's because the universe already tried to give him Jake and he rejected it. He rejected Jake. He let him die, but then he did this extra step to save his life again, and the universe sighed and said, all right, I'm going to try again, but you have to pay a cost. Now I'm going to make you work harder because you didn't appreciate this the first time.
I like that.
I know I'm maybe shouldn't personify Ka or whatever, but I can sort of see the argument that Jake going to Roland the first time had more to do with like we had this belief during the Gunslinger that Jake being there was the responsibility of the Man in Black.
Sure.
And now I'm thinking it's more likely that Jake being there was just Roland's inexplicable power to draw people magically between worlds. And that was what that was. Roland drew him to the way station. Mm-hmm. And then Roland discarded him, and now he's getting a second chance at it.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Okay,
I like that. Cool. I think there is some talk in the book earlier that that seems to make it seem like the Man in Black did want Jake there, and like this whole paradox is the desired outcome that the Man in Black had, but we haven't seen anything definitively on that. That's just speculation by our characters. So yeah, I like that.
Good point. We'll pay attention.
Yeah. So Jake, when cornered by a teacher asking what school he was with, again channels some Kowtower here, and that's why I think I really linked Hinterlands to Hyperborean Wanderer this time, because he just randomly blurts out that he's on French leave, which if you'll remember is what Cal accused him of doing back when he was in the Manhattan Restaurant of the Mind. Uh-huh. He quoted him, I think it was, talking about French leave. And then also when asked what school he attends, he just randomly says Marquis Academy, which is not something we understand in the moment at all. It's just another random word that pops into his head that has no meaning at the time. Uh-huh. We learn later this is the name of the street where he'll bump into Eddie and Henry. So, but this just comes to him in this weird moment.
Yeah, this is more of the universe throwing him stuff type thing.
Right.
I mean, yeah,
it's just constant. It's just constant. Like he's constantly being either fed stuff or seen or shown stuff, or just randomly pops into his mind just constantly throughout this chapter.
I didn't even notice the marquee thing. I honestly, so yeah,
that's great. So here in this moment, though, Jake leaves the museum and is almost immediately caught by a very inquisitive cop who questions why Jake isn't in school today. And at first, like I was like, a cop wouldn't actually like stop a kid in New York City. Like in today's New York City, if like a kid happens to be walking down the street, like an NYPD cop has more important things to do than stop a cop. Uh-huh. But then I remembered that this is the 1970s and he's near Times Square, and that's a really shitty area. Uh-huh. It's not the best area, and a little kid stands out there a lot. So it makes a lot of sense why this cop would see this little kid here. I think it mentions that he's like the only white kid too, uh-huh. Which makes him stick out even more. But the cop like immediately starts hassling him, and Jake, refusing to be stopped, just like pulls out the key randomly. Uh-huh. Like again, this is not like it's not like we don't have a voice coming in telling Jake to do this. Like Jake doesn't think about why he's acting this way. He just does it. And he pulls out the key, and it somehow immediately mesmerizes not only the cop, but also everyone around him, including a young woman who was probably not a librarian.
It's so good. Yeah.
I think it's so funny when King chooses to be coy about things. Uh-huh. And then like later in this chapter, like the deciding moment is when Susannah like bangs the shit out of a demon, and yet here he doesn't want to say prostitute. I mean, first of all, like, we're in Jake's head, so right. I understand it here, but Jake knows she's a prostitute.
Well, that's the funny thing. I think that Jake actually has this sardonic sense of humor that is being mm-hmm. kind of projected by him seeing a woman who's obviously a prostitute. I mean, first of all, he thinks that she's wearing fuck me heels, doesn't he? and then concludes she's probably not a librarian. So I mean that's sort of, and honestly, we'll see Jake is great, because when he's talking about Henry later, it's just the best. Like, he's just roasting the guy.
Yeah.
And it's like, and this is, I mean, obviously it's King, but I really think a lot of that is from the perspective of Jake. Jake has this streak of just burning people in his thoughts, which I appreciate, of course.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. But yeah, so we see here that the key is like magical and that it hypnotizes people. Yeah.
I mean, another scene that we didn't really like need, but serves the purpose of showing how powerful the magical key is.
Yeah.
Because it really is just like bending the universe around Jake to make sure that he stays on the path.
Yeah. And I mean, the quote here, he says, when he asks the cop if he can go, he says, "So I can go, can't I?" Huh? Oh, sure. Go, for your father's sake. So like, not only is the key like mesmerizing the cop, but it's like feeding him words almost.
It's breaking the world around him to be more in line with the beam, whatever that means. Yeah.
That's great. I love it. I love it so much. So Jake, having gotten away from the cop, finally decides to head over to Co-op City, Brooklyn. And he gets there a little before 2, knowing Dream Eddie told him to be there about 3. This is the weird part of the story, Matt, where I tell you that Co-op City is actually a real place in New York City, except it's in the Bronx. It's not in Brooklyn.
Huh.
Matt, what's that about?
No clue. I mean, I wish I knew New York well enough to notice these things, because then I'd be able to tell if this was like a thing that King does often, or maybe just here, and then make some guess as to whether he's doing this on purpose or maybe just making a mistake. I mean, I imagine it was harder to write a book about a faraway city before Google Maps existed.
Sure.
And honestly, this reference is the first time in my life that I've ever Googled, what is the Bronx? And now I finally know that, you know, the different boroughs of New York City, that is, are what normal humans from normal cities call counties. And because there are 8 million people in New York City, each of these boroughs is actually pretty populous and dense and has its own character. Which I guess I kind of knew all of this from movies, but realizing that a borough is just a county was like that makes sense, you know.
Sure. I mean, the answer here is we have no idea, right? If this is just a King oopsie or not, but because we get to play in a world in which everything is intentional, it indicates that there are some differences between the world that these characters live in and our world. So we have to question ourselves, is this not our Earth like we were making the assumption it was? Is this a close but not quite version of our Earth? We don't know. Right.
I mean, that's the thing, is we don't know if it's just a mistake or if, like you said, it's a slightly parallel dimension or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll have to pay attention to mistakes like this, though.
Either way, it's fun.
Yep.
All right. So back in Midworld, the Ka-tet. Can we just pause here and say I just got to say back in Midworld, the Ka-tet, and I got to say both those. It's just it's so nice. It's so nice.
Yeah, we arrived finally.
Anyway, they crest a hill and see the green plains of Midworld, and then beyond that, a giant ancient city. And I just want to read the description of the city here because it's great. She could see the city. It lay dead ahead, a misty collection of spires and towers rising above the far edge of the horizon. Those airy ramparts might have been 100 miles away, or 200, or 400. The air of this world seemed to be totally clear, and that made judging distances a fool's game. All she knew for sure was the sight of those dim towers filled her with silent wonder and a deep, aching homesickness for New York. She thought, I believe I'd do most anything to see the Manhattan skyline from the Triborough Bridge again. Then she had to smile, because that wasn't the truth. The truth was that she wouldn't trade Roland's world for anything. Its silent mystery and empty spaces were intoxicating, and her lover was here. In New York, the New York of her own time at least, they would have been the object of scorn and anger, the butt of every idiot's crude jokes. A black woman of 26 and her white-bread lover who was 3 years younger and who had a tendency to talk like dis and dat when he got excited. Her white-bread lover who had been carrying a heavy monkey on his back only 8 months before. Here there was no one to jeer or laugh. Here no one was pointing a finger. Here there were only Eddie, Roland, and herself, the world's last 3 gunslingers. She took Eddie's hands and felt it close over hers, warm and reassuring. So that all was wonderful. The reason I pulled this is because I think we've generally seen from Susannah's point of view a little bit less in the story. And I think it's important that King reminds us or maybe tells us for the first time that Susannah has bought into this quest just as much as Eddie has. And she loves it here and she loves what's going, and she's like been enraptured, not in the same way Eddie has. Like Eddie's the one that's gotten to see the glimpse of the tower and really like become as addicted to it as Roland is, but Susannah loves it here too.
Yeah, I do like this, and I think this is important because I remember at the end of Drawing of the Three and kind of toward the beginning of this book, we talked about the idea that we don't really know Susannah. We knew Odetta. We don't really know Susannah. We don't know how much of her is Detta and how much of her is something new. And there were things toward the end of Drawing of the Three that almost made her seem a bit frightening and unknowable. Here we see into her mind and we see that she's great. We don't need to be worried about her, I don't think.
Yeah. But I mean, that we also have to talk about the city because we see this giant city, Matt. I think one that puts New York City to shame because they are maybe 400 miles away from it and can still see the spires and towers of it from that far away. So like already we see Midworld as this place, like clean, beautiful air with nothing in it. This incredible city ahead of them that I think Eddie looks at it later and sees like, hey, that city looks pretty good. It might still be in working order. You might have been wrong there, Roland. So like we're seeing this place that I think we're being like led to believe was this beacon of like purity and hope and goodness. And all we know about it is it's no longer that way before, but visually it kind of seems like it is.
Yeah. I mean, I really want them to go there because I'm just certain that there's no horrible things lurking within.
No. Come on.
Yeah, come on. This is Stephen King. Come on.
Roland also in this moment points out a river which he recognizes as the Send River, which this is the moment where he says, I didn't even think that was real. It described as mysterious and unreal to him as the Guardians were before this whole thing started. So I think that's a really fun moment.
Yeah, it's cool. We just kind of acknowledge the river's there and then we move on. And yeah, I mean, obviously it's probably the river from the riddle, but we're not going to do anything with it yet.
Sure. So we saw Susannah's reaction to the city, and here now we see Eddie's. Eddie looks at the city, and like we said, he's hopeful. He says it looks intact, and there's going to be help waiting for them there. But Roland doesn't seem to think so. And I love how King writes Eddie's hope here. Eddie's hopes were up. That dimly sketched skyline, has awakened homesickness in Susannah's heart. In Eddie's, it kindled a sudden blaze of supposition. If the city was still there, and it clearly was, it might still be populated, and maybe not just by subhuman things Roland had met under the mountains either. The city dwellers might be Americans, Eddie's subconscious whispered, intelligent and helpful. I love that little beat, that little parenthetical that King just inserts from Eddie's subconscious. City's dwellers might be Americans, followed immediately by intelligent and helpful.
It's so funny. It's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, basically the book is saying, Eddie, and maybe even you, reader, are optimistically imagining that there will be good, helpful, reasonable people here. Americans like you.
Yeah.
Not crazy people, certainly not. Stephen Edwin King wouldn't do that to us.
Yeah, I just like the choice of making Eddie's subconscious mind do a very American thing, which is to assume that the only helpful, friendly people in the world are Americans.
Yes.
And it couldn't possibly be any other type of person. No. And like Eddie's not like a horrible person, right? No. But he has flaws just like any other human has flaws, and I think this is a very American flaw of our Eddie.
Yeah they'll be like me, good, right. Like me, American like me.
It's great. I love it so much.
Yeah.
King also in this moment brings up the term Deus Ex Machina here, when he's basically saying Eddie does not know the term Deus Ex Machina. like, and not only that, but Eddie hasn't grown up enough to know what the word meant, is what the text says. We're going to talk more about Eddie's childishness in a second, but I like how King is laying the seeds for that conversation here. Like, he's 23 years old. He's not grown up enough to have learned what Deus Ex Machina is.
Yeah, that is really interesting, because I feel like there's a decent chance that Jake knows what a Deus Ex Machina is.
He
like,
probably does.
Just based on how he's described as a reader and famous student of English. But I think this story is saying more than just Eddie has never heard this word before. I think he's maybe saying Eddie has not had the life experience needed to understand the meaning behind this word, or something along those lines.
Right. And how improbable it actually is. Like, the whole idea is that getting to the city and being like showered with like food and comfort and instructions for how to continue the quest would be to King a Deus Ex Machina, and so therefore could not possibly happen. But Eddie is too ignorant, too naive, too childish to even recognize that. Yeah,
well, I mean, Eddie even brings up the idea that they're going to find these wise fucking elves in the city. And I mean, it's funny because King makes a Dark Tower a Dark Crystal comparison and a Last Starfighter comparison.
Right.
But not the Lord of the Rings comparison, which is the obvious one when you say wise fucking elves, because clearly to me, what we're meant to imagine is Rivendell, where the people, the hobbits arrive after having gone through much struggle and strife, and then the wise fucking elves tell them, all right, we're going to have a council. We're going to decide what needs to be done. And then we're going to point you in the right direction with a bunch of food and some guardians, and everything is going to be smooth sailing from then on. Of course, it's funny because it's not in Lord of the Rings, but at least they get their chance to rest and recuperate at Rivendell.
Right.
Whereas I don't think that's going to happen here at all. And King's basically telling us, no, it's not going to happen.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I doubt Eddie's read Lord of the Rings. Like, I can believe he's watched The Last Starfighter and Dark Crystal, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just don't think he's read Lord of the Rings. So maybe has Jake? You think Jake's read Lord of the Rings? Probably, right?
Yeah, probably. I'm just gonna say yes.
All right, cool. So while the rest of the Ka-tet looks upon the city in wonder, Roland seems something so much closer, something he's actually seen before, a ring of stones, a speaking circle, Matt. Eddie sees them too, and through Ka recognizes that this is a place of danger and importance for him, and immediately says this is where Jake is going to come through. And then the realization that the time is upon them hits Eddie, and he starts losing his shit, Matt. Basically, this is going to happen tomorrow, and the key's not done yet, and he's like terrified that he won't have what it takes to complete it. And Roland confronts him about this, basically becoming the teacher again, becoming court. He slaps the shit out of him and then compares him to David, his hawk, which we know what happened to that hawk.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to see here how each of the Ka-tet members brings with them these vital things that the mission couldn't succeed without. And here it's Eddie and his carving, right? Without this, there would be no getting Jake, and without Detta, there would be no wheelchair that they needed to use to cart Roland down the beach. And just,
sure.
It's interesting how the story keeps doing this almost in a chain-like fashion, where each thing kind of is required for the next thing. I think it's really fun.
Well, and it's interesting, like, who Ka chooses to inform of these things, because it doesn't let Susannah and Roland know the full scope of what Eddie's going to have to do here. It just lets Eddie. Eddie knows this is the spot Jake's going to come through, and Roland confirms that by, these things that they hang out are usually thin places in the world, where the boundaries between the worlds are a little bit thinner, and so that's a good place to come over. So he has that knowledge, but he doesn't know, like, Eddie's the one that's given the instructions on everything. Roland is really just reacting based on his previous knowledge. And I think that's interesting. Like, yes, he's definitely needed, but also Ka has chosen him for this moment.
Yeah, true.
And he does lecture him after the slap here. I love this. He says, "You haven't finished the key, but not because you are afraid to finish. You're afraid of finding you can't finish. You're afraid of going down where the stones stand, but not because you're afraid of what may come once you enter the circle. You're afraid of what may not come. You're not afraid of the great world, Eddie, but of the small one inside yourself. You haven't forgotten the face of your father, so do it. Shoot me if you dare. I'm tired of watching you blubber." Coach Roland doesn't pull his punches.
No, he's a bit of a hard ass, I think it's fair to say.
Yes. And Eddie's reaction to this is just to weep and admit, yes, I'm afraid. Yes, I'm terrified. Of course I am. And Roland like goes to embrace him and like does so quickly and then basically just pushes him towards Susannah. Is just like, you deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. And Susannah looks up at him and says, "Sometimes I hate you, big white man." And Roland placed the heels of his hands against his forehead and pressed hard. "Sometimes I hate myself. Don't ever stop you, though. Do it." I love that so much.
Oh, me too. I'm glad you pulled that out, because this is one of those beats where we're reinforcing this idea, this through line where Roland pushes on them. And they don't really enjoy it, but on a level you can't argue with the effectiveness of the methods, but then on the flip side, it's kind of eroding at Roland.
Yeah. It's definitely like one of the main motifs of the story so far. We've hit this beat again and again, and I think we will later, because there's a whole new person for Roland to train going forward, right?
Yeah, true.
So it's great. But you're right, it does work. Eddie collects himself and apologizes, and he accepts the key back from Roland. Do you have something to tell me? Roland says. And that's like the perfect teacher thing, right? That's like, do you have something that's like a parent talking to their kid, right?
Yeah.
Do you have something you would like to say to me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Eddie here says, "I'm sorry, I'm afraid." There was something terrible in Eddie's voice, something which hurt Roland's heart, and he supposed he knew what it was. Here was the last of Eddie's childhood, expiring painfully among the three of them. It could not be seen, but Roland could hear its weakening cries. He tried to make himself deaf to them. "Something else I've done in the name of the tower. My score grows ever longer, and the day when it will all have to be totted up, like a long-time drunkard's bill in an alehouse, draws ever nearer. How will I ever pay?"
Yeah, I mean, like we were just talking about, this is making us realize that Roland's methods are affecting him. They wear on him.
Yeah.
He's accruing this feeling of just increasing regret and shame. And yeah, he is making Eddie and Susannah into gunslingers, but he's making himself a little bit worse every time he does this kind of thing. Maybe into the beast, maybe into the monster that he was worried about.
Yeah. And I mean, killing Eddie's childhood, like being the person that takes away the last little morsel of Eddie's childhood, I think is really powerful. Especially here, like, I think it's very poetic that this is happening in the chapter where we get to see Eddie as a child, right? Like we go back and see a 13-year-old Eddie. And so it's kind of acknowledging that this person that we see here, this very clever, smart, person who manages his brother as best as he can, we're losing that side of Eddie. It's gonna be gone now, and it's tragic. And yet Roland does it anyway, because that is what is necessary in his mind. Yeah,
I agree. I feel you.
So Eddie goes off on his own as the sun sets and tries to work on the key. He makes a wish to Old Star as he does it that he do well. He's plagued by doubts here, and of course by Henry. Henry is the verbalization of those doubts. But he does manage to finish here, Matt. He decides the key is as perfect as it will ever be, and he says he's done with it, and then he randomly starts crafting a small sharpened stick, and we don't understand why, and I don't think he does either. He just knows later that this is what he needs. We do learn, Matt, a little bit later that the key is not perfect, that when he finishes the key here, it's not right yet. And we learn there's just a small little sliver of wood right around that S curve that King has talked about over and over again, that it just isn't quite right. So why do you think this is the moment where he finishes the key? Why does he fail here in this moment?
I just feel like he hasn't really been pushed, psychologically to the point where he can really confront and throw off this uncertainty and self-doubt that has come from Henry. It's just... he still has too much fear. He doesn't have the clarity of that he needs yet.
Yeah. And I wonder if part of it is like, from Roland's perspective as a teacher, like you can like scream and belittle your student as much as you want. Them truly becoming a master of themselves and coming to realization needs to be something they get to on their own. And so it could never be at Roland's insisting. It had to be something that Eddie gets to by himself.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens at the end of the chapter versus not happening here.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So early the next morning, the Ka-tet heads down the road towards that speaking circle. And this is just, there's nothing really to say here yet, but I love this. They hear this great noise echoing from that city that's hundreds of miles away. And each character thinks it sounds like something different. Roland hears it as drums. Eddie hears it as some huge piece of machinery. And Susannah hears it as a heart, some huge diseased beating heart. I love that. There's nothing we can do with this, right? But it is interesting that each character hears it, interprets it differently, and it's Susannah who leaves us with the most ominous of all.
Yeah, no. It just reassures us. Everything's very reassuring about this giant machinery and nothing bad in the city.
Nothing bad at all. Nothing bad at all. But we don't have to worry about that because we're going back to Earth, and Jake is back in Co-op City, and he's strolling by a movie theater that's having spaghetti Western week, and he sees Clint Eastwood. And decides, hey, that guy looks a lot like Roland. And he starts yelling at the poster about letting him die, which I think it's a little bit of a meta moment because I think Stephen King has said in his mind's eye he had Eastwood when he imagined what Roland would look like. So I think that's just a little bit of a meta acknowledgement there, Matt.
Sure. And maybe it's telling us like this is roughly what you should be imagining in your mind as you read. I think I had heard that actually.
I also think it's showing that like the worlds are starting to come together a little bit here. Now he's seeing this and like he's becoming more and more a person of Midworld as he's getting closer and closer to the house.
Yeah. Well, also it's a great moment it's great to show that Jake is still angry about all of this because he should be, right? Like,
yeah.
Like mostly we've seen him thinking about how he still loves Roland and how he wants to go to Roland's world and he wants to be with him. And I think it's human and relatable that when he finally does see someone that looks like Roland, his first reaction is this very justifiable anger. And we'll see at the end of the chapter that the first thing he asks him is, "Are you going to do that to me again?" So like, yeah, I mean, it's a contradiction. It's a powerful contradiction in that he loves this man and he's going to risk everything to get to him, but he also is afraid of him and angry at him. All at the same time. Yeah, it's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we hear Eddie and Henry, and Jake starts to follow them. And this week on Henry is the Worst, we spend like the next 10 pages just really diving into all the ways in which Henry is the absolute fucking worst. And I really like this because I think the book has done a good job of establishing that Henry kind of sucks in the past, but every bit of Henry we've seen has always been from Eddie's perspective. So it's always been slightly guarded or a little bit sympathetic. But we're not seeing Henry from Eddie's perspective here. We're seeing Henry from Jake's perspective. And King is allowed to go just full ham on how shitty he is. And this is the part that you talked about a little bit earlier. And I need to read this because it's so fucking good. The big boy's face was one that Jake had seen before. It was the face of a kid who would think it the height of hilarity to douse a cat's tail with lighter fluid, or feed a bread ball with a fish hook planted in the middle to a hungry dog. The sort of kid who sat in the back room and snapped bra straps and then said, "Who, me?" with a big dumb look of surprise on his face when someone finally complained. There weren't many kids like him at Piper, but there were a few. Jake supposed there were a few in every school. They dressed better at Piper. But the face who was the same. He guessed that in the old days, people would have said it was the face of a boy who was born to be hung.
Drag him.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically describing a psychopath almost.
Yeah, or just like, the criminal element, just somebody who's going to be a failure at life. And what's funny is, I mean, he's basically right because Henry ends up becoming a junkie indebted to mobsters who then kill him.
Yeah. And I mean, I like what you said earlier about the fact that it matters that this is before his experience in Vietnam, because I think there was this born sympathy of Henry as a person who went through a terrible experience in the war and it fucked him up. And while that is certainly still true, it's not like he was a saint before that.
Right. He's just always a bully, Yeah.
Yeah. And this isn't like, I mean, there's definitely a reason for being a bully, right? Like it's still cause and effect. We learned about the kid that both of their sister was lost and how that affected their mother and how that affected the two of them. And so you can see the path for why he became this person, but he's still this person. And like, he's just shitty. Like he's just shitty to everyone. He's torturing that girl. Like there's a point where he just is waiting in the playground for Eddie to come back with the money from their parents and just starts like tripping kids, like little kids just playing in the playground, just doing it because it's fun.
Right.
He's the worst. He's so shitty.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting how King really does go out of his way here to be like, he's way worse than you were thinking. However bad you were thinking, however ambivalent you were about him, he's just like injuring children for fun. He's awful.
Yeah. One thing about King, he really does not like bullies. He really, really doesn't. Like the bullies in his stories are usually not just like playground jerks. They're like psychopathic evil people.
Yeah.
And I think that's true with Henry here as well. I mean, that might be a little bit strong for Henry. We don't see him like kill anyone, but he's definitely like in the line of what the Stephen King bully looks like.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but it seems to strike a chord with all of the movies and the few books that I've been exposed to.
Yeah, definitely. So teen Eddie wants Henry to go with him to the Dutch Hill house, but Henry decides he wants to play some basketball first, and they play a 1-12 game. And we see what Eddie talked about earlier here. Henry sucks at basketball, and Eddie is really good at it, but Eddie lets his older brother win because he's also very smart. I love this. Henry offered a head fake that wouldn't have fooled Jake's mother.
Yeah, it's yet more like really funny writing from Jake's perspective of just how like almost clownish Henry comes off as, but baby Eddie has this unconditional love for his crappy big brother. And so it's a bit funny, but it's also more than a little heartbreaking. It actually reminded me a bit of Jake's love for Roland, who is a guy who has not been the best toward him.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that sits a bit uncomfortably for me. I'm not sure what to do with that right now.
I like that a lot because like one of the things I was about to say is that Jake is just super observant here. Like throughout this whole thing, like he has Henry pegged right away, to the point where when Eddie steals the basketball from him and scores, he's like, "Uh-oh, you're going to regret that." Because and then he realizes that Eddie's actually smarter than he thought. So he's got both of them pegged and he's got how the relationship dynamics pretty down. But yeah, he doesn't see that in his relationship with Roland. He's not as aware of that, or at least if he is, he's just as powerless to do anything about it as Eddie was to Henry. Yeah.
Maybe it's fair. I mean, I think it is fair to say that he is very observant, but it's very common for people who are observant to not necessarily be self-aware. So, and also he's 11. So
he is 11.
But it makes me wonder if we're going to go somewhere with this idea that like his unconditional love for Roland is a danger to him, maybe.
Yeah. So they finish up the game. Henry wins, of course, and then decides to reward his brother that they will go to the haunted house after all. First, he's got to run home and bum a couple of bucks from their mom while he stays at the playground. And this is when he just starts tripping children because it's fun. And it's awful. Like, I hate it, man.
Yeah, I mean, when it's interesting because when Eddie isn't here is when Henry unleashes the sadism. It's almost like Eddie has, in some sense, been not keeping him in check, because that makes it seem like Eddie has power. It's more like Henry just doesn't quite want to let Eddie know how awful he is for some reason. I don't know. It's interesting though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe he's worried that like the full scope of everything he wants to do would be even too much even for Eddie, so he holds back a little bit until his brother's gone.
Yeah.
And then is the worst.
I like that.
All right, so we head back to Midworld, and the Tet has reached the speaking circle, which Susannah describes as looking like Stonehenge, which is great because that's how I just see all. Anytime someone says a circle of rocks, my brain just says Stonehenge. So
yeah,
it's good to know that I'm not the only one. And it's time to deal with the fact that this circle, like the last one, is going to have a demon in it.
Of course.
And what do we know about demons, Matt?
What do we know?
They like to fuck. So Roland asks Susannah if Detta Walker is still around, and I love Susannah's response is like, yeah, she's always around. And they say they might need her here because this demon might be into dudes and might be into ladies, or maybe both. But either way, they got to get prepared to get down with the D.
Yeah.
Mon.
Yeah. It's interesting because Detta doesn't exactly come forth and take over. It's more like Susannah is channeling those parts of herself that are Detta more directly.
Yeah. It's not an alternate personality being allowed to be unleashed, but she does like her speech changes to match Detta's,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's fun because like we wondered when these two people combine who they were and what was left, and they're both still there, and I love that Detta Walker is still needed, that like this side of Susannah is still useful.
Yeah, right. I mean, it absolutely right. We talked about this idea that I think I even said like maybe it was Detta that Roland really needed because she's the one who's like a vicious monster, and that can that sort of has obvious uses, and here of course we see one of those. Yeah.
So here we have Roland trying to explain what he wants Detta Susannah to do. This is a demon's place. Demons are not human, but they are male and female, just the same. Sex is both their weapon and their weakness. No matter what the sex of the demon may be, it will go for Eddie, to protect its place, to keep its place from being used by an outsider. Do you understand? Susannah nodded. Eddie appeared not to be listening. He had tucked the square hide containing the key into his shirt, and now he was staring in the speaking ring as if hypnotized. There's no time to say this in a gentle or refined way, Roland told her. One of us is gonna have to fuck it to keep it off Eddie, Susannah interrupted. This is the sort of thing can't ever turn down a free fuck. That's what you're getting at, isn't it? This is the most Stephen King plotline ever. Of course, it comes back to sex with demons. Yeah. It's been this way since the very beginning of the series, and here we have it once again.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just gotta fuck a demon to keep it from killing you and your friends. It reminds me of some of my ex-girlfriends. But I mean, yeah, like I think we knew we were going to see more of this sort of thing. We've been talking about sex, violence, and magic being intertwined since the first book, and so I'm not surprised to see this crop up again. Yeah,
especially in this manner, connected with the dark forces, right? The bad stuff.
Yeah,
it's been a through line throughout these books, and so yeah, here it is again.
Yep.
But there is something more complicated than just the demon. As we see Eddie as he's like in his trance, starts randomly reciting a poem here. And it's actually, Matt, I don't even know if you remember this, but it's a subversion of the poem he randomly started reciting all the way back in chapter 1, right when he got near the portal to Shardik's lair. There he said the phrase, all is silent in the halls of dead. Now he's saying all is not silent in the halls of the dead. Now he is saying there is a monster between the worlds. And Roland is like, you mean the demon? And Eddie's like, no, it's not a demon, it's a monster. And I love this moment because we learn later what this monster he's referring to. He's talking about the doorkeeper, which is the house that Jake's going to have to fight. But this poem is really interesting, Matt, because I did my thing where I was like, oh, surely this is a reference to either Child Roll Into the Dark Tower Came or the Wastelands, because every other poetic reference in this book has been that. But no, this is coming from Eddie, or I guess you could argue is coming from Ka, and therefore just coming from King.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see that it wasn't a reference to anything.
Yeah, I guess I am too, because it's clearly not Eddie's voice. It's
no.
It's interesting because I don't know if we're ever really going to find out what the hell was going on with that house. like it's a monster. Okay, what is it? What does that mean? It's not a demon. It's a monster. Okay. It's a house. It's a living house. Okay. I don't know.
Don't worry about it. It's just a monster.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I assume that the house is the monster. It's funny because during this whole climax from here on, I feel like I should be less like logical and puzzle solvy than I'm often trying to be, because frankly, as I was reading, I wasn't thinking at all analytically. I was just enjoying it. I was just locked in for the ride. I was just into the story.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I mean, it is the climax of the chapter and the climax of the first half of this book. Mm-hmm. So it definitely moves beyond just here's all this things I'm throwing at you and the thematic resonance of them to more just like cool monster house. Got to get away from it.
Yeah.
So that's fair. So back on Earth, Eddie and Henry, get to the Dutch Hill house with Jake hanging out right behind them. And I love Jake see the two of them, but it like almost in his mind like reaches just past them to Jake. It wants me and I can't run away. It's death to go in, but it's madness not to, because somewhere inside that place is a locked door. I have the key that will open it. The only salvation I can hope for is on the other side. So this idea that like I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't kind of thing. It's this really beautiful moment where like the house sees him and wants him right away.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's, I don't know. It's just, this is some of the best of King, right? This supernatural horror, unadulterated, unfiltered by anything else. Like this has been a complicated book. There's a lot of different ideas and tones, and very often it doesn't feel like horror. We talked about this idea that like, oh yeah, King is a horror writer, but it's actually relatively infrequent in this book that there's anything you can point to and be like, that's horror. That's just horror.
Sure.
But this is one of those moments of the story where you're like, okay, this is clearly horror. Yes.
Yeah. And speaking of that, the description that King makes of the house here is just him 100% in his lane. Right. I just want to read this here because it's beautiful and mood setting and wonderful here. It slumped in the hot light, a ramshackle slate-roofed revenant growing out of a hummocky, trash-littered yard, somehow making Jake think of a dangerous dog which pretended to be asleep. Its steep roof overhung the front porch like a beetling brow. The boards of the porch were splintered and warped. Shutters which might have been green leaned askew besides the glassless windows. Ancient curtains still hung in some of these, dangling like strips of dead skin. To the left, an elderly trellis leaned away from the building, now held up not by nails, but only by the nameless and somehow filthy clusters of vine which crawled over it. There was a sign on the lawn, and another on the door. From where Jake stood, he could read neither of them. Ugh.
Yeah.
Just his words here. A beetling brow, a hummocky, trash-littered yard. Like, it's just so great. It's so powerful and descriptive. Like, this is just King doing what he does.
It's gross. I mean, the word hummocky isn't intrinsically a gross word. You could imagine a hummocky lawn that's green, right?
Yeah.
But when you mush it in with hummocky, trash-littered, slate-roofed, revenant ramshackle, you immediately get the idea of like, oh, it's hummocky with like garbage. It's and it's unkempt and it's horrible. It's just like the sound of the word hummocky coming out of my mouth feels gross right now.
Well, and he's using alliteration very effectively here, right? Like ramshackled roof, hummocky trash litter, like dangerous dog and a beetling brow.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of alliteration here, and I think it just helps like make this description sing a little bit here.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. I mean, I'm picking out all kinds of alliteration now that you point it out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. And you don't want Dick to go in there, but he's gonna.
Just the way, I have nothing clever or intelligent to say here. It's just the way he like sets the mood of like. He does this all the time in so many of his books. Like if he wants you to be freaked out by the look of a place, he can just transform it into the scariest sounding place ever. And he does that so effectively with this house. I don't want to go in this house.
Yeah. Well, I think the key to this whole paragraph is the dangerous dog which pretends to be asleep, because if you cut that out, it's more or less just a description of an ugly house.
Sure.
But when you front load that in the first sentence of the paragraph, it contextualizes everything that comes after it, where you're imagining this waiting presence that has all of these hideous qualities to it. I don't know. I love it. I love the construction of it. I love the ordering of it. It just paints a beautiful, not just picture, but feeling.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. All right. So let's go in. Eddie and Henry stand around only for a couple minutes before Eddie gets uncomfortable and wants to leave, which I really like that, like, despite the house wanting Jake, there is even a hint, even here in 13-year-old Eddie, that he is special and more important, and therefore something about the house unsettles him more than other people. I really like that little bit. But as Jake looks on as the two of them walk away, Roland speaks to him again, urging him into the house, and he goes. Yeah.
It's still weird to hear that, it's still weird that it's Roland's voice. I'm going to say at this point, either this is like a time traveling Roland from the future, or it's just Ka/the White/the Beam speaking in Roland's voice somehow.
Well, all things serve the beam, Matt.
That's true.
You know that now.
Good point.
So, back in Midworld, the Ka-tet walks into the circle, and our demon friend comes. We're told it's a masculine demon, and though it goes right for Eddie, Susannah's summoning of it with, quote, all of the female force which lived at the core of her, and it immediately responds to her and attacks her. Meanwhile, Eddie is drawing the door. He just walks in and starts drawing a door in the dirt with that stick he fashioned earlier. So, Matt, we're at the climax of the chapter and the climax of this half of the book. And things start to move super fast now, and we're cutting back and forth between all of our different major characters, and it's really frenetic, and it's awesome, and I love it, but it really makes it hard to summarize, like, chronologically. So I think what I'm going to do here is just, like, tackle each character individually, and then wrap it all together at the end.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So first up, we'll do Jake. Jake makes his way into the house, immediately sensing the evil of it. He describes it as singing a song that's dark and terrible in the same way the Song of the Rose was beautiful and pure. So, like, if that was the white, this is the exact opposite of that, right? And I think, like, by comparing it to the rose, we're seeing that, or we're at least alluding to the fact that these are opposing forces, that one force is trying to get him through the door, the other force is trying to stop him.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It does make me wonder how powerful this house is, what this house is. Is this house related to, like, the major antagonist of this story? Like, is all of the evil stuff in this universe connected? Is it all part of the same evil force, or is this just like an evil house that exists for some reason?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely don't know leaving this chapter. Yeah,
for sure.
So as Jake enters the house, he is once again thinking of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. It's the same quote that he wrote on the top of his essay, I will show you fear in a handful of dust, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yep, exactly. And really this kind of creeping dread that we're building is just King at his best.
Yeah, and, like, I don't know what the Wasteland poem is about, right? I have no idea what it's about, and I have no idea what, in context, I will show you fear in a handful of dust means, but it doesn't matter because it's just so evocative when used here.
Yeah.
I love it so much.
Right. Whatever it means in that poem, here we're in this old, dusty, dead house, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, it means something to me here, regardless of whatever it means in the poem.
Right. So after being attacked by several spiders, Jake makes his way through the house and finds the door. Carved into it is written "the boy," immediately drawing a connection to the doors that brought Eddie and Susannah into this world. So this is the door. This is it. And I think that's interesting, right? The idea that, like, while this drawing is entirely different from the other drawings that have happened, the door is still the same. Like, it is still the same door with the person's name or descriptive term written on it. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, right. It just, I mean, like I was kind of saying earlier, this is a drawing, but the rules are different for whatever reason. I have my own kind of convoluted idea as to why the rules are different this time, but it is that thing happening again. Yes.
Yeah. But just as he starts to head for the door, The monster in the house, also known as the monster that is the house, comes to life and comes after him. I love the description of what the text calls the doorkeeper here, Matt. Like, King's monster ideas are wonderful, and I want to read this and then talk about these ideas a little bit. So it's described as one plaster hand tore free of the wall, trailing an unraveling bracelet of rotted electric wire. It grasped the sofa and threw it aside, leaving ghostly white finger marks on its dark surface. More lathing burst free as the plaster fingers flexed. They created sharp, splintery claws. Now the face was all the way out of the wall and staring at Jake with its one wooden eye. Above it, in the center of its forehead, one wallpaper elf still danced. It looked like a weird tattoo. There was a wrenching sound as the thing began to slide forward. The hallway door tore out and became a hunched shoulder. The thing's one free hand crawled across the floor, spraying glass droplets from the fallen chandelier. Oh, it's so good. This house monster. I just love it. I love every bit of this.
You can visualize it so perfectly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, now that you've drawn my attention to the way the words sound, like spraying glass droplets from the fallen chandelier, it's like beautiful. Just sounds beautiful to hear. Yeah, and the with the wallpaper elf, like he walked into this room and saw these elves wallpapered on the wall, and then at one point they start moving and dancing, and then even as the monster like tears its way out of the house or becomes itself out of the house, those elves are still dancing on its head like a weird tattoo. I love it so much. I love it's not as if the house comes to life and then it's just like a living, breathing monster anymore. Like the way it's described here, like it's a plaster hand. Like the plaster fingers are flexing. Yeah. Like lathing is bursting free. Like it has a bracelet of rotted electrical wire. Like this is a monster, but it is made out of the house still. Like it is underneath it all. It is just wood and plastic and plaster. It's I don't know. It's so wonderful. I when I first read about this house, like I was immediately enthralled by the look of this thing. And I think that is something King does really well throughout his stories. And we've only seen hints of it so far in these books, but these monster ideas, these really creative, wonderfully creepy, otherworldly monsters. Yeah, I think maybe the the lobstrosities, the slow mutants. Mm-hmm. That's all I can think of off the top of my head. That's basically
all we've seen so far.
Yeah, and again, I'm the King virgin. I haven't really read that many stories, and the ones that I have read, I don't think were really monster stories. And so
I mean, Needful Things, he both is and is not a monster, not in the traditional.
Right. I mean, there's like a spider monster in it at some point, but that's a pretty minor attribute of the story, actually.
King loves the spider monsters, let me tell you.
He does, because spiders attack Jake in this house, and you're just like, well, they're just spiders? Oh, okay, they're just like evil spiders. Okay. Yep. Sure. Yeah. I obviously I've seen most of the Stephen King movies. Those tend to have a lot of creepy stuff in them, but even those, like I'm having a hard time thinking about monsters other than It, which I actually haven't seen. I don't know.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get some examples of that next week.
Maybe so.
That's a allusion towards the discussion question, not towards anything that's happening in the chapters.
Okay,
next week.
Gotcha.
I realized that as soon as I said it, that I'm just confusing the shit out of you.
Yes, a little, but it's understandable. Okay, gotcha.
So, Jake heads for the door, but accidentally drops the key. And it's this wonderful tense moment of, oh shit, he drops the key. But he's so close now, and he can hear Eddie on the other side urging him on. He rips the floorboard up, grabs the key, sticks it into the door. And we get this wonderful moment here. The plaster man roared again, but its voice was momentarily drowned out by a harmonic shout, which Jake recognized. He had heard it in the vacant lot, but it had been quiet then, perhaps dreaming. Now it was an unequivocal cry of triumph. That sense of certainty, overwhelming, inarguable, filled him again. And this time he felt sure there would be no disappointment. He heard all the affirmation he needed in that voice. It was the voice of the rose. And it's this wonderful moment of victory, like he's done it. And then he opens the door and it's just roots and dirt. It's just really like this wonderful buildup of affirmation, like certainty, overwhelming, inarguable certainty. And then he opens the door and oops, we need both doors.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because we're definitely like, yay, we did it. But what's interesting now that I'm reflecting on it, is that the voice of the rose or whatever, is also like, yeah, we did it. But then it's actually wrong. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to find that it can be wrong.
Well, I don't know as much as I'd say wrong, but like
premature.
Jake has accomplished his purpose. True. And it's celebrating Jake's passed his quest almost. Like he's succeeded. And now we've just got to wait on Eddie's part to succeed.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But first, before we talk about Eddie, let's talk about Susannah.
Okay.
So if I have one complaint about this book so far, Matt, it's that Susannah Dean is kind of underused in it. Roland has this thing with Jake, and now Eddie and Jake are connected through Eddie's role in the drawing. And Susannah just really hasn't had much to do. And very little time has been spent on her character. I think we've grabbed really the only times that we like cut to Susannah and focus on her and learn a little bit about more her and what she's thinking and what she's doing. And King gives Susannah something to do here. Literally.
Yeah.
Her job is to fuck the shit out of this demon, and that's what she does. And I kind of want to talk to you about that because like it's not that like I'm saying that, oh, she's the woman and therefore isn't given as much to do here, and that's what King's doing. But like I do feel a little bit bummed that Susannah just hasn't had a lot to do yet. And the first thing she's going to do is like, oh yeah, bang this thing.
Yeah, I guess I mean I definitely empathize with especially coming out of the end of Drawing of the Three. I was really like, oh, I want to figure out like, who is this new person going to be? Who is Susannah going to be? This is such a like I thought that was going to be the central thing we were going to do with the first part of this book is like figure out and explore this new character, because she basically is a new character. And I mean we've spent some time. I don't think it's nothing, right? We've had scenes with her where it was just Roland and her one-on-one. We've had she's played a role in everything that's happened up to this point. She shot Shardik's hat off, but I still feel you in your feeling like there should be like we wish there was more. We wish there was more Susannah.
Yeah, and rest assured, there will be more Susannah. Susannah will get her day, and she's one of my favorite characters in literature. So this is a feeling that is going to go away. But I did, when I'm thinking of this analytically, and I'm like lining up like who is getting to do what. Susannah has gotten the short shift, I think. Shrift? Short shrift?
I think it's shrift. Never actually said that out loud.
I haven't either. Let me short
shrift. Yeah.
Yes, it is shrift. Because shift sounded immediately wrong. Anyway, so Susannah's job is to fuck this demon. She does it. First, we flash back. We do this brief flashback to Detta in the drawers. Detta, who never let a man get one over her. Susannah is summoning Detta as she wrestles with the demon. And at first, she's losing. She describes sex with the demon as like Susannah being fucked with an icicle, which is just a wonderful visual motif there. So this is, Matt, like, this is a difficult section of the book to discuss. Susannah is like more or less getting raped here. And the solution, the key to success, is to basically turn that around and rape the demon. Like the description here is sex as a weapon, but also a weakness. That's what Roland says to her. And Susannah uses that weakness to fuck the demon to death, basically trapping it. She builds a trap using Detta and locks him in a place. I'm not like super comfortable with what's happening here, although I do understand the metaphor, right? Like I think this is very powerful, and it's a very powerful moment for Susannah as a person. She's asserting herself as this powerful woman who is not going to let someone else take one over on her, and she wants to melt that icicle.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a tad uncomfortable, but I mean, I think that's one of the good things about books actually, is that they can make us uncomfortable in a way that's actually safe, so that we can deal with those feelings, you know?
Absolutely. I'm not saying this is uncomfortable and like, therefore it should not have happened. It's just like when I was sitting down to write my notes, I was having to deal with the fact that this is a part that makes me very uncomfortable.
Sure. You know, so just to talk about the metaphor that you mentioned in passing there, like I think we talked a bit about how, you know, just a minute ago, how sex and magic and violence are tied together. in this story, especially when it comes to these evil monsters and dark powers.
Sure.
And this is an organic continuation of that idea. And
Yeah.
I think also the big thing that I'm seeing here is that the way this situation plays out, the way Susannah wins, is by refusing to let herself be the victim, by seizing the reins of both sex and, in a sense, violence. It gives her control of her situation. And I really think that's a major theme of this book. Gunslingers are not people that things happen to. Gunslingers are not victims. Gunslingers are women and men with deep steel who will just keep getting up again unless you put them down hard enough to kill them. So, yeah, like you were saying, it's uncomfortable, but I think that the metaphor functions. I think the scene works the way it's supposed to work. I think it actually ends up being a powerful moment because Susannah is struggling and maybe almost fails to keep control and maybe almost succumbs, similarly to how Eddie is struggling with his own challenge in parallel. But both of them are on the verge of becoming victims of failing and becoming victims of, in Eddie's case, a victim of his past. In Susannah's case, a victim of, well, in a sense, her past, but also this demon in the present. But they both are able to dig deep and find their steel and win. And it works emotionally for me like gangbusters.
Yeah, no, I very well described. I agree with that. It is uncomfortable. This is something that is, difficult to talk about, and you need to write about it carefully. But I think you're right. I think it is a powerful moment for Susannah. It is a moment of success here where she uses Detta to allow herself to retain control. And I mean, I wonder, this is one of the things where basically the same exact thing happened to Roland in The Gunslinger. Like, he went through this almost identical situation. And I was way less uncomfortable with it than I am here. And I think that might literally just be because the gender roles were reversed, which speaks more to, I don't know. Do you know what I mean though?
Well, I do. I think you, for me, you nailed what my kind of issue. It wasn't really an issue. It was more of a mild feeling of disappointment that I was like, oh, like, Susannah hasn't really had a lot to do, but now we're going to do this with her. Okay.
Yeah, this is the only thing we're going to do with her, has her using sex.
It's not the worst thing in the world, but I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I sure hope a lot of cool stuff happens with Susannah later to sort of offset this, because...
And it does.
Okay,
it does.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I guess my biggest problem with it is the idea that, like, I don't think this is what the book is doing, and I don't want to criticize the book for it, but the implication that, like, the way to overcome being raped is to just turn it around on your rapist is kind of like, just like, eh.
Yeah, but I don't think I honestly don't think that's what the book is saying. I get that it's possible to, like, read that, but I'm just like, I think it has more to do with taking control of what has been done to you. Like this scene isn't about the demon. This scene is about Detta's whole existence, her whole past, her whole story of who she is and how she sees herself. And the demon is a linchpin for that, in the same way that this isn't really about the key for Eddie. This isn't really about carving the key. This is about Henry.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. Absolutely. I agree with that. And that is the part of the scene I like 100%. I think it's just one of those things that's not aged super well. But yeah, no, it's great. I think I enjoyed that conversation. I really like your take on it a lot. It's a very powerful moment for Susannah for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
So let's talk about Eddie.
Yeah.
Eddie is frantically drawing the door, and every part of it we see is the same one that Jake has seen. And, like, the magic doesn't kick in until he totally finishes it by writing the boy along the top of it. And it comes to life, and we hear Jake scream, and Eddie knows it's time to use the key, but it won't work, Matt. It wasn't a perfect match, so the lock won't turn, and Eddie screams out in despair. And yet what happens, Matt? He finds that steel.
Yep.
I love this.
It's so good.
Eddie's terror and panic suddenly felt away. The cloak of coldness dropped over him, a cloak Roland of Gilead had worn many times. It was the only armor the true gunslinger possessed, and all such a one needed. At the same moment, a voice spoke in his mind. He had been haunted by such voices over the last 3 months. His mother's voice, Roland's voice, and of course, Henry's. But this one, he recognized with relief, was his own, and it was at last calm and rational and courageous. You saw the shape of the key in the fire. You saw it again in the wood, and both times you saw it perfectly. Later on, you put a blindfold of fear over your eyes. Take it off, and look again. It may not be too late, even now. And of course, he takes it off, and Eddie sees his mistake. One small, tiny bit of that difficult S-curve, a single sliver of ash so thin it was almost transparent. He cuts it off, inserts the key, turns the door, and he's done it.
Holy shit, do I love this whole bit, but especially this moment where he just holds out his hand, this knife.
Yeah.
And Roland just slaps the knife in his hand. It's just
Like Roland's just totally subservient to him in this moment. He's doing his thing and he's going to be there for him. I love this though. Like it fits exactly what we were talking about, right? Like he's heard all these voices in his head, but the one voice that allows him to see the thing clearly comes from himself. That's exactly what we were talking about earlier, that like Roland cannot teach you into this. He can only go so far. The last bit has to be you, has to be yourself. And this is him being a gunslinger, the only armor the true gunslinger possesses, and all such a one needed. I love that line because that's not how Eddie talks either. It was the only armor a true gunslinger possessed, and all such a one needed. That is like fancy. That is fantastical.
Well, it reminds me that Roland and I'm all confused because we've been talking about her other personalities. Roland and Susannah have both commented on how Eddie talks dumber than he actually is.
Yeah.
And I'm beginning to wonder if that is almost, I mean, part of it is just your upbringing. You know, you talk the way you're brought up to talk. But part of it, I think, may even be he is trying to seem dumber than he is, because that's almost a kind of camouflage.
Yeah, definitely with Henry for sure. Yeah,
with Henry specifically, yes. And so when he has these moments of clarity and power, which happen occasionally, he usually slips into this more high fantasy and epic and you know, good, clean English way of thinking and speaking. And I think that works really well. I love it.
I love it too. It's so powerful and wonderful. I think you're right that the knife moment, the fact it was just one little last piece, like that his friends could take him 99% of the way there, but he had to get that last little tiny bit. It's wonderful. And after this moment, he, like, just as the voices disappear from Jake and Roland as Jake enters the world, Eddie says the voice of Henry maybe is finally gone. It's wonderful.
I just want to give major kudos to the audiobook reader, who I'm sure is listening right now.
Yes, of course. Because
the whole this whole section was amazing. The scream that Eddie gives of the, like, I don't remember, it's like, God, no, it's like, it gave me chills.
Yeah. It's like his worst fear coming true, right?
Yeah.
He's failed. And yet, despite that failure, he finds his steel and removes the blindfold of fear. I love it. Yeah. I love it.
Great moment.
So Roland orders Susannah to release the demon just as the door opens. He grabs it and jumps through the door into Jake's world.
This is such a Roland move. Such a Roland plan where there's no plan at all. It's just grab the demon. Gonna use it to choke the house monster. I also love the description of it as like a manta ray with like a hook on it. It's like, oh wow, that's way weirder than I was imagining, and awesome.
Yeah. Definitely. So I love this description here. The gunslinger's hands parted and his arms were immediately thrown wide. He staggered backward. Jake felt serrated teeth touch his skin, ready to tear flesh and grind bone, and then something huge rushed over his head like a gust of wind. A moment later, the teeth were gone. The hand which had pinned his legs together relaxed. He heard an unearthly shriek of pain and surprise begin to issue from the doorkeeper's dusty throat, and then it was muffled, crammed back. Roland grabbed Jake and hauled him to his feet. "You came!" Jake shouted. "You really came!" "I came, yes, by the grace of the gods and the courage of my friends. I came."
Yay. I mean, this moment of them finally reuniting is so earned. I mean, I think in a sense, I've been hoping for a book and a half, ever since Roland let Jake fall, that, that this would be rectified. I've been angry and disappointed with Roland, and I've wondered how he would make up for this choice that he made. And, now he's rescued Jake, and I don't know if he's made up for the choice, but now he can at least begin to make up for the choice. Sure. And I'm happy about this. It's just such a good whole, story movement overall. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And I kind of want to talk about how it is the monster and the demon that defeat each other in this moment.
Yeah.
And that's a very Tolkienian concept too, right?
Sure.
The idea that in the end, evil defeats itself.
Yes.
That is one of the flaws of evil, is that it will defeat itself. And we have these two things. We don't know what these are or like how they relate to each other, if they're on the same team, quote unquote. But Roland uses one against the other, and it is because of that Jake is able to get free. Yeah,
no, that is a super, super Tolkien idea. I didn't make that connection, but yeah, I mean, I think Roland maybe even knows this. Like maybe this is some sort of principle of the world or of magic that he is aware of, and that's why because otherwise, why would he bring the demon through?
And he had this plan before the door was even open. Like as Eddie is turning the key, he says to Susannah, "Release it on my mark," basically. So like he formed this plan, like, so he knew this wasn't. It was a spur of the moment thing, but it was a spur of the moment thing with intelligence behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's great. So Susannah and Eddie pull both Roland and Jake back through the door. I really like this map because, like, the positioning of the door, it's on the ground in Midworld and horizontal on Earth, and therefore, like gravity, they have to pull them up.
Yeah,
and I love how it kind of echoes Jake's final moments back in the Gunslinger, right? Because he fell downwards into the dark. And this time Roland dove into that darkness, dove down to save him.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think he's literally having a chance to rectify his mistake, right? It's fantastic.
It is.
I love it.
But the first thing Jake does in Midworld, as we said before, is say, "Where is he, the Gunslinger? There's something I have to ask him." "I'm here, Jake," Roland said. He got to his feet, drunk walked over to Jake and hunkered beside him. He touched the boy's smooth cheek almost unbelievingly. "You won't let me drop this time?" "No," Roland said. "Not this time, not ever again." But in the deepest darkness of his heart, he thought of the tower and wondered. Ugh.
Yeah. I mean, it's great because he doesn't think to himself in the deepest darkness of his heart that he actually would.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're afraid of him thinking. It says that he wondered. And I think that's just him realizing that he has this weakness. He has this weakness for the tower, where if you really put in that same position again, as much as he knows that it's the wrong thing to do, he knows that he still might make that choice again. And
right. And Roland has been so since the moment with Jake, he's been kind of pretty forthright about that. Like the end of the drawing of the three, he basically says, "Yeah, I'm not going to stop until I get to the tower." And that like here is the most amount of uncertainty we've seen in him regarding this stuff.
I mean, it's the first time we've even seen an inkling that he's thinking he might not just sacrifice any of them for the tower.
Yeah. It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
So Jake meets Susannah, and we have this beautiful moment where he recognizes her name from the book and is like, "Does your dad own a train company?" It's really, or what? I forget what he did. I forget what Susannah's father in the book did.
He was like the mayor or something. Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah,
Never mind.
And then he recognizes Eddie, saying he met him earlier in the day, but he was only 13, which confuses the shit out of Eddie. I love it. He also asks if they found the train yet, and nobody knows what he's talking about. Some more great hints.
Yeah. No, nobody knows what he's talking about, but Roland's like, "No, not yet, but I'm sure we will," because that's how this works.
Yep. Yeah. At this point, just like anything, this Jake is not coming just to save him. He's coming with knowledge. He's coming with information that is probably going to matter to them. I love it. And then we get here the last few words of the chapter. Are your voices gone? Roland nodded. All gone. Yours? Gone. I'm all together again. We both are. They looked at the same instant with the same impulse. As Roland swept Jake into his arms, the boy's unnatural self-possession broke, and he began to cry. It was the exhausted, relieved weeping of a child who has been lost long, suffered much, and is finally safe again. As Roland's arms closed about his waist, Jake's own slipped about the gunslinger's neck and gripped like hoops of steel. I'll never leave you again, Roland said, and now his own tears came. I swear to you on the names of all my fathers, I'll never leave you again. Yet his heart, that silent, watchful, lifelong prisoner of Ka, received the words of this promise not just with wonder, but with doubt. Ugh.
Yeah.
I mean, we get two of these beats here at the end of the story, right? It's not just, King just doesn't do it to us once. He does it twice.
Making sure we don't miss it, I think. I mean, at the risk of repeating myself, this has been the major through line of all three books and probably the entire story. This idea that Roland is this person who is so full of love, so human, and yet is constantly hounded by this mission. And the language here is even sharper than the one a couple paragraphs ago. Lifelong prisoner of Ka is such a damningly precise way of describing his relationship with Ka. And it's a new twist on it too, because he's never really phrased it this way, where we could see him, think of it this way in terms of, this isn't a positive thing. This isn't Ka. Ka is something that he's happy to be following. He's a prisoner of Ka. It sucks.
Yeah. It also is very pushing blame off of him, right?
True.
Well, but I mean, the interesting thing, it's his heart thinking this, right? Like his heart, that silent, watchful, lifelong prisoner, received the words with wonder and doubt. Like, so he almost is amazed at himself as he says this. Like, I'll never leave you again. I swear on the names of all my fathers, I'll never leave you again. And his own heart receives these words of this promise with wonder. He's amazed at himself for making this promise, even as he doubts it. I don't know. I love that.
Well, sure. Yeah. If it's his metaphorical heart making the observation, he's like, I've seen you break similar, promises often enough. Yeah. Well, I don't know if Roland actually breaks promises, but he's seen Roland betray his better impulses often enough. Right.
I mean, and this is not like the one Jake asks him directly above, you won't let me drop this time. And he says, no, not this time, not ever again. Roland is being more committal to this than Jake is even requiring in here. Like, you won't let me drop this time. No, not this time. And then he adds not ever again. And then the second time we go through this whole thing, Jake has asked nothing of him. They're just there crying and hugging and so happy to be in each other's arms again. And Roland recommits to the thing he just had doubt in. And he doesn't need to be this committal to it. Like, Jake is not asking for this in this moment, and yet he's still doing it because he wants it so much. This isn't about giving Jake what he needs. This is Roland making a promise to himself. Like, that's why his heart is receiving the words. It's not, we're not feeling Jake receiving these words. He's saying this to Jake, but he's saying it to himself. And he's doubting he's doubting his own ability to make that promise to himself.
I think you're exactly right. Roland is the one who wants this to be true. Yeah. He's afraid that it isn't true, though.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's wonderful. And that is the end of our chapter and the end of part 1. Jake, can you believe we're halfway through this book already? I can't believe it.
No, we haven't even seen the train yet.
Yeah. Where's the train?
Where's the train? That's my musing this week, is we're going to see a train.
Okay.
I also want to go to the city. I don't know if we're gonna, but I just really want to go to the city with this evil beating heart of machinery or whatever it is.
All right. Well, let's see. We'll find out. First up, though, we have to talk about our audience discussion question from last week. Our question was, why do you think King enjoys making so many references to other stories within this chapter being last week's chapter, but also Also this week's chapter.
Sure.
Just kind of does it a lot. We got some great answers here, Matt. So let's go through them real quick.
Yeah.
First up, we have Sarah Penguin, who says, King is playing with the idea of inspiration by listing works and authors that inspired the story or him, using emotions or themes by referencing books that are known for them, and the idea that English teachers / fans will find unintentional references and treat them as meaningful. Hey, that's what we do. He is also commenting on how stories influenced us as children and at what we make children read. And it was in this chapter because children forming their personalities and discovering who they are most likely to be influenced by a story. Yeah, I like that. So specifically, we were in Jake's head, we were in a kid's head, and so much of what kids become are influenced by the stories they absorb at that age. I like that.
Yeah, it's certainly true for me. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Antaraxiary says, I think one of the big reasons is that he does one big reason he does it is as a shortcut to get the reader into the headspace he wants them in. When he quotes "Don't fear the Reaper" in The Stand, that puts me in a certain kind of mood, you know? It's like he's level setting so that we're all on the same page before he moves on with building his world. I think he also does it to add depth and richness to particular scenes that feels kind of that kind of feels like a reward for those who get it. When Jake's teacher is prattling on about essential summer reading books, we all feel how utterly unimportant that is to Jake in this moment. But if you happen to know the content of those books, it makes the absurdity even more apparent. Jake doesn't need to experience insanity in works of fiction. He is already living it right now.
I love that. I love that so much.
That to me, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. You unlocked it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's perfect.
They go on to say, but I think the big reason is that these references are all to King's heart songs. They are books, yes, but also poetry, music, even movies and TV that really touched King in some way, and he wants to weave them into the stories he tells to make them his own and pay homage. Sometimes it's very big and sweeping and explicit, like with Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came. Sometimes it's big and sweeping and subtle, like with Lord of the Rings. Sometimes it's a one-off, like the bear being named Shardik. That makes sense on its own. Shardik is a giant bear worshipped as a god in the Richard Adams book. But Eddie still thought of rabbits. I haven't read Watership Down, so I don't know, but maybe it further informs that situation or Eddie as a character somehow. But King mentions that book a lot, and I think it must be meaningful to him. It also makes me want to read it. I think that is absolutely intentional. Stephen King wants to share the things he loves with his readers so that hopefully we will go out and experience them too. I like that a lot because like I dabble, I write from time to time, and I will absolutely throw in a word or a reference from like if I'm writing science fiction, I'll use a word that is just taken, just completely stolen from something else. And it's, I'm very much being like, I want to honor this thing that I got this idea from by using this word. I want other people to know about this other thing that I got this idea from, and I want them to go read that. I'm not stealing because I want to pretend that this was mine. I'm stealing because I want everyone to know about this thing, you know? I like that answer a lot.
Yeah. And I think our next answer from Trucker Dad 23 kind of builds off that idea. They say, King has said, if you want to be a writer, then read a lot and write a lot. As you guys have said, the man does both of these things constantly. It's not only his life's work, but also his hobby. I think he loves reading and writing so much that he wants to share it with us in every way. He wants us to be a constant reader like he is, not only of his books and stories, but of other writers' works as well. King gets inspiration from other writers, and I think he sees the power in the way he ties their stories and poems together with his own. And perhaps he wants to lay the groundwork for people to carry on his legacy long after he's entered the clearing at the end of the path. It's a great answer too. I think that builds nicely off of what the previous answer was talking about.
Yeah, beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to answer the discussion question. And maybe you can answer the next one as well. This one's, I think, a little bit more of a fun one, Matt, because it was a fun chapter. So this week we're asking, without spoilers, what is your favorite Stephen King monster? And if it's a Dark Tower monster that we have not encountered yet, please be very, very vague. If you're worried about it, just go ahead and answer it. And if I find it too spoilery for Matt, I just won't read it. but try to be as vague as possible. And if you happen to be new to Stephen King, like you're like Matt, and you've only read these 3 books and maybe one other, just talk about your favorite novel-based monster, a monster that comes from a book that you like. Just answer that way. I love Stephen King monsters. I think they're great, and I'm interested to see what you guys like. So excited to see the answers to those questions. As always, you can email us at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, or you can respond on Twitter @doofmedia, or we have a subreddit for Doof Media, which is reddit.com/r/doofmedia, where each episode will be posted. So you can write in the comments there your answer, or on YouTube. We post these on YouTube as well, so you can leave a comment there. Wherever you want it, we will find it, and we will read your answers because we love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it is really fun being able to read people's answers. I mean, just like this week, I was like, oh, I didn't see that, and now that's my preferred answer to why King did that. So great. Yeah,
I mean, we definitely are 2 people with 2 perspectives and lenses on this book, and the more lenses and perspectives we get on the stories, I think the more wholly we will be able to see the story. So that's why we do these discussion questions, and that's why we ask you guys to reach out.
Yep. And remember that you can also reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, or on Twitter @doofmedia.
Yeah, and if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else you can listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and if you like this show or any of the other shows on the Doof Media Podcast Network, of which there are many.
So many
that we should probably talk about more.
Yeah, we should.
You can consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. If you donate to us at the $5 level, then you'll get to hang out with Scott and I once a month in a Doof and Chill session, which is basically a YouTube live stream where we do something fun. We've done a number of different fun things. We've done role-playing games. We've done Jackbox online games. We've done other things. Oh, yeah.
We've done just Q&A sessions.
AI before. Dungeon thing that one time. Q&A sessions. Yeah, that's true, too.
It's just fun times to hang out and have fun.
And, of course, access to the Discord, where we kind of just hang out and talk about all kinds of stuff. But among those things is the Dark Tower series. So
yeah, definitely. We have a spoiler channel for all of us people that have read the whole series and get to come and laugh at Matt without him knowing about it. And we also have a channel just for whatever the latest episodes. So you can just chat about what we said and what you guys are thinking as you're reading through them. It's a lot of fun. Come join the Discord if you haven't. It's fun. Really fun. But if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that's of course okay. You can, wow, I can't talk anymore. You can help us out by sharing this podcast. Share it with your friends. Share it with your bullies. Maybe they'll become good if you share them. Yeah. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Since you can't interact with people, just write it on a piece of paper and then tape that to like a lamppost outside.
I like it.
And people will walk by because everybody goes on walks now.
It's true. They do. In the world of COVID-19, everybody walks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, you can also always help us out by leaving us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or if you have any other service. I think those are the only 2 big ones that I know of, but those reviews really do help us. You can be like this week's Spotlight review, Samaris, who gives us 5 stars and says, I've been following Matt and Scott's various podcasts for a couple of years now, and I've been looking forward to their deep dive into the Dark Tower series. Now that they've gotten the ball rolling, I couldn't be more excited for the future of this show. They're bringing their exceptional brand of commentary to a series that I absolutely love. I couldn't recommend this podcast more, whether you're new to the Dark Tower or just wish to relive the experience, coupled with the host's informed and entertaining analysis. You hear that, Matt? We're informed and entertaining.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Samaris, and thank you to everyone who has taken the time to leave those rating and reviews. Like we always say every week, they really do help. They really do matter, and we appreciate you guys doing them. All right, well, that's it for us this week. We will see you back right here next week to read Chapter 4 of The Wastelands, titled Town and Ka-tet. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.